Καλώς ήρθατε στο Athens Bar Show. Επόμενοι ομιλητές μας για σήμερα είναι η Antony και ο Aaron Lawrence, μέλη της ομάδας του Blanton, που θα μας μιλήσουν για την πρωτοπορία της ιδέας της μονής κάνης που άλλαξε για πάντα τη βιομηχανία του Bourbon. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Hello, hello, hello. Everybody having a good whiskey show? I am. I'm Aaron Lawrence. Tony Mills here with me. See some familiar faces, some people I haven't seen, but we just wanted to take a little bit and talk about Blanton's with you guys. And the other thing is, you guys are here, we're here for you. So we want this to be as interactive as you want it to be. So definitely, we're gonna leave lots of time for questions. If there's anything that you guys say, feel free to raise your hands. We're here for you guys, so don't hold back.
Thank you, Aaron. Yasas. First of all, thank you for attending and coming. Some of you all have come by the booth already. As Aaron mentioned, he is the brand ambassador for Blanton's globally and marketing. I'm with Blanton's distribution, which basically will be supporting Grains to Drops, who will be the distribution point for Greece, which is Mr. Harry Papadimitriou. As he mentioned, this is your experience. We have a philosophy, and it's a little bit different maybe. This is your show, and it's your class. It's not our class. Master of what? Nothing. We're masters together and in our time. So what we're going to do is a few things a little different. First, I want to apologize that they moved it from the other segment. They thought we had too many people coming, but I'm not so sure they got the message to come here. So that's why they moved it last minute. So in doing things a little different, we're going to give you some whiskey now, because the first thing we need to do is have a drink. A lot of people want to talk about technical stuff. We came here to try some good spirits. Second part of that, we're going to give you a little bit of some synopsis of Blanton's in the postmodern era of bourbon, because we kind of know from Prohibition and all of those classes, and there's a technicality of what makes bourbon. We're going to kind of stay away from that segment and kind of talk about what Blanton's from 1984 meant and how it impacted bourbon globally. The majority, we're probably going to talk 20 minutes, maybe a little bit more. The main thing that we're going to do is we're going to open it up to questions. As I said right at the very beginning, the philosophy is a little different. If you have a question or a desire, you came with something you want answered about Blanton's, about whiskey, about bourbon, about Kentucky, about Aaron's beard, I don't care. We're open, ask the questions, it's your show. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So we are passing around the original Blanton's bourbon. I want to make sure everyone gets one. So when we're kind of complete, please tell me. Let's start at the beginning. In 1984, bourbon wasn't very important in the world because of the quality issues that I feel that bourbon was putting out there. It was inconsistent, it was all over the page. And part of the resurrection, as you know the story of Blanton's, and I'll let him do some of the technical stuff, was that Elmer T. Lee was asked to create something to show that the quality was on a level to have a global appeal. He came up with the concept that he was taught by Colonel Blanton as he worked for him as a young man. And he used to go, does everyone know what a whiskey thief is? So he would be told to take the whiskey thief and go to this section of the warehouse H and pull and bring it back so he could take it. And when he found a barrel that he liked, just one, not blending, that's the one he would pull for his special friends, dignitaries, and clients. And at parties, back in the day, the only social media was all the distillers and owners would get together once a month, once every 2 months, change each other's whiskey, try it, talk about what they discovered, good things and bad. They were a small, tight community. So that's kind of how Blanton's was first distributed, was just from there. So 1984, going back forward to the origination of Blanton's, He named it after his mentor, and he took the same philosophy of a single barrel. That single barrel philosophy means, and there's a lot of questions that I might answer, but technically you can ask him about the production side. We cull, you know what cull means? We don't accept many barrels, less than 20% are eliminated. We still go by taste. Same way with that thief. We steal some bourbon out of each barrel. We have a panel of, there's 30, but 5 people of each barrel. If one rejects it and it's blind, we don't sell that barrel. We sell it wholesale to someone else. So we have a standard that we try to keep on each barrel. As you know, the wood influences the barrel, which I'll let Aaron speak a little bit more. And maybe that special bottle that's being released today is about that. Is that influence can be good or bad. Sometimes you have a sweet barrel. As last year's special edition, there was 7 or 6 barrels that was called the honey barrel. Do you know what a honey barrel is? It's a little confusing now because you'll have Jack Daniels and Jim Beam and some other great producers that put it with honey. A honey barrel was a term in Kentucky that meant the sweetest barrel, the best one. And he would say, that's a honey barrel, put that aside. So that's what last year's was, the honey barrel reference. Had nothing to do with honey other than a term. This one is gonna be Char 4, which Aaron will talk about a little bit why it's named that, but it's about the barrel and the wood.
Thank you.
I broke it. Tough group. So, thank you. With that, the barrel is probably the most influential part of the process of aging bourbon, obviously, and any brown whiskey, brown spirit. So, first thing, do we have all the glasses? I'm stalling a little bit of time. Are we good? Does everyone have a glass? We good? All right. First of all, llamas. Please drink and enjoy, and we'll discuss it from here. It's empty. Harris, this gentleman needs some whiskey in his. Let me guess. Hang on a minute. You must be Dimitri. I heard about you from last year. Yeah. Your glass was always empty. The thing you're not sharing is that you emptied it. You share a lot. Okay, good. Sharing's good. Sharing's caring. So, please, this is the original, which is what the only line we had back in 1984, up until what time, Aaron?
So the next iteration of Blanton's that was introduced took over 10 years. The first bottling of Blanton's Gold Edition was in 1995. So it took some time. And a lot was happening in the bourbon world during those 10 years, but also with Blanton's. And I will say, too, that the Blanton's original that you guys are trying right now is exactly the same as the standard that was set in 1984. So kind of a cool thing how Elmer T. Lee was able to create a single barrel program at a time when all of his peers, all of the other master distillers in Kentucky, look, Kentucky's a small place, and all those master distillers, they had breakfast with each other, their wives were all friends, and there's, talk about sharing is caring, there is the culture of sharing the knowledge and helping each other out, and so all of Elmer's buddies said, you're crazy, single barrel bourbons cannot be commercially done, because from a consistency standpoint, how can you guarantee the quality? And I think Elmer was a very passionate man, but he was also, a man who was original in his actions and kind of not afraid to go against the grain a little bit. And so he was tasting this whiskey every day, and he knew how good it could be at a time when whiskey in the U.S. and Kentucky really wasn't selling that much, bourbon particularly. And so he said, it's really easy, guys. We're going to do two things. The first thing is we're going to pick the best barrels that the distillery has to offer. the honey barrels, and we're going to go to Colonel Blanton's honey hole. I remember from when I first started working at the distillery where that is. And then the second thing is, after we pick the best barrels that the distillery has to offer, we're going to compare them against that first barrel that we picked. So there's always a standard that tethers it to the very beginning. And so the profile that you guys are tasting in the whiskey right now, it's called Blanton's Original because it is exactly that. It's the original profile that Elmer selected going back to 1984.
Thank you. So one of the things, a little segue, Elmer, not only did they think he was crazy, Elmer thought he lost his job because they put a lot of effort and a lot of money. As you see the beautiful bottle, it's kind of a jeweled bottle with 8 panels around it. And we'll talk just a little bit about that. Can anyone here give me a number of how much you think they sold the first year they released Blanton's in 1984? Take a guess. In bottles. 180. He said, I've killed myself. I've cost myself a job. This great idea that I had, I'm fired. The problem was they never thought it could be worth 50 euros. They never thought that you could have the consistency, and you never thought that you could duplicate it. But he was a really clever guy. He understood that quality needed to be delivered, but what he understood is what you all wanted. That's really what he understood. You want a quality product, just as today. And please feel free to drink this. This first pour is for you to enjoy. Drink it up, and we have some other expressions. So that's kind of how Blanton's got started, and that was the concept. It wasn't an overnight success. It wasn't a boom. Internally, in the bourbon world, think of it like Hios, like Mastica. It was a small area that all who produced Mastica years and years ago knew it. They knew each other. They knew who did what. It's the same with us in bourbon. Now, of course, it's global and it's America's spirit, and it's one of the fastest rising spirits in the world is bourbon. But I also want to apologize for outside the U.S., there was a reason, as you all know, if you can remember back, some of you aren't as old as me, maybe a couple might be, but not many. We used to put, I think, the worst segment product and ship it export just to recapture some capital. So we would put Bourbon Deluxe, the old Four Roses, Yellow Label, some of those things that quite honestly didn't live up to what we knew at home. If you came to Spitimu, I'm going to give you Blanton's. If I come overseas to visit your beautiful country, I saw Four Roses Yellow Label. I didn't order it, but unfortunately that's what we got into. So our reputation was deserved globally. So with that being said, Blanton's was the first penetrator, and I'll tell you how. We had a governor, a female governor named Martha Lane Collins. To her, I think she, as an individual, there was a tax law that changed that helped the bourbon. We won't go into that. We don't have time. But there was a lady called Martha Lane Collins. She was the first female governor of Kentucky. She, back in 1986, 84, maybe 84 or 86, this period, recruited Toyota, might have heard of it, it's a little car company, back then it was, to come produce cars in Kentucky. And she went full out, and they never thought it would happen. She convinced them, but during that process, the Toyota executives, and where she would have to go to Japan all the time, she would take Blanton's. That's what she carried to them. And the Japanese had a renaissance with bourbon because of that process in Kentucky. That's the real thing that launched it in Japan. Everyone wants to think different rumors. That's the truth. So with that being said, we are Japanese-owned, Blanton's Bourbon is, but it's by a huge sake corporation that was one of the first to believe, and probably the one that saved Blanton's, because bourbon still hadn't taken off, as we told you the story of 30 cases, 180 bottles a year. So they drew enough in the late 80s to keep it alive. That's why we still have a significant portion of allocation goes to Japan. And that's a big question, why Japan? Why do you go there? It's not for money. It's because they're really, with Martha Lane Collins and the Japanese, we're so lucky to have a job and have a nice drink together and another great product to share for generations, hopefully. So that's really the history.
Yeah, and just to add to that idea of Blanton's as an export, so a couple of firsts in the Blanton's book. It's, of course, the world's first single barrel bourbon. So we were the first ones to really say, we're not going to blend this, we're going to showcase these barrels. But in doing so, we created the first premium category for bourbon. And in a lot of ways, it was the first export bourbon as well. And so I would say not of premium bourbons, yeah, for sure. And I would say not just Japan, but I would add that especially in the early 90s and actually all throughout the 90s, Blanton's and bourbon in general was not selling very well in the US. And so we had to rely on the export market to keep the brand alive, because otherwise we wouldn't be enjoying this great whiskey here today. So
that's a little bit of how we launched ourselves, and we're being topical. So at this point, I want to ask, does anyone have a question about the bourbon you tasted or any of the things we spoke about? A question? Man, we're good.
yeah, what tasting?
We are good.
Getting? I mean, what are you guys tasting? Because yeah. Burgundy, like the red wine. Vanilla and honey, no doubt. Yeah. So one of my favorite things to do when we're doing classes like this and tastings is, because it's single barrel, every barrel is a little bit different, and so the tasting notes that people shout out are sometimes very unique. Sometimes you get some very specific things, like rose petals sometimes I've heard, or even like dark plum, ginger is another one. Of course, Blanton's, I will say, is a very classic bourbon profile. So that vanilla note, the burnt sugars with the caramel and the toffee, those are going to be there. Another fun note that I get in Blanton's a lot, very commonly in our barrels, is like a citrus rind, like an orange peel note can sometimes show up in the background. So just some things to be thinking about while you're tasting that whiskey.
Give me that. I told you he'd be technical. What other things do you might taste, or other questions you have? What about you? You're the bourbon lady of Greece, I understand.
Well, it has an amazing aftertaste.
The finish. Yeah. The finish is long. What do you like about it? It's smooth or long?
It lasts, but it goes out.
Yeah. One of the words that I use to describe, which you'll taste another skew here, is that the finish is very feminine. And feminine is not a bad thing for a whiskey. And delicate is another word you could utilize. But the finish, when it finishes, we say it asks you back, it invites you back for another drink. And the higher the proof, you drink it a little slower, because the more the proof is high, you get a longer finish. Does anyone know why our barrel proof that's has such a unique? What are we pouring next, Harris? The gold. The gold will be next, which will be 103, which will be 51.5% for you guys. You'll see a different profile. So, any other questions before I move to the quick next segment?
I was just gonna say that the dry out on the glass is like sweet myrrh.
Sweet
Myrrh. It's like
Myrrh. Yeah, it is. It is. And everyone's palate's different, and that's what is kind of cool. So really, let's tie this last part together. The reason I asked different taste profiles that you made is that each barrel, even though it's a single barrel and has the structure the same, that wood influence can change, and you will find a little more myrrh or a little more orange peel, a little bit this. And we're going to move to that here in just a second. So, any other questions before I go to the next little segment? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, how do you know the size
Because we take a thief and we test our barrels quite often. And as they are maturing, we grade them and say this one needs more time. It maybe need to be in a higher part of the warehouse to be warmer. Or this one is progressing a little too fast. We need to put it kato so it cools it a little bit. And Kentucky has 4 seasons. We're very hot, we're very cold, and we have very dynamic ones in between in the fall and spring. So one day or one period, a storm system will come in and we'll be 80 degrees or 28, 30 degrees in the afternoon, but we'll be 20 to 15, under 10 sometimes even. So this really pushes it in and out of the barrel. That's one of the reasons why bourbon doesn't have the same aging as Scotch, because Scotch is dormant many hours, days, months of the year. So good question. What else do you have? Anyone? Okay.
Can I add to it?
Yeah.
So on the topic of honey barrel, the question was, what makes a honey barrel a honey barrel? And obviously there's no like legal definition or anything like that. Tony talked a little bit about the Blanton standard and what it takes, to make the cut, so to speak. Not every barrel is of the quality to be a Blanton's. And so we have this kind of high bar that we set from the very beginning, and that was Elmer T. Lee. And then when we taste through these barrels, like we're talking about, every barrel is exactly different. No 2 barrels are the same. And so just like people, they each have their own identity and character. And I like to kind of compare it to basketball. So, yeah, exactly. So, we can all play basketball. We can all throw the ball at the hoop. Some of us are better than others, but there's only one Michael Jordan, right? And so the honey barrels are the Michael Jordans of the bourbon world. Hope that helps answer.
Yes, sir. What a great question, actually. That's one of the better questions I've had in the years. So we actually buy the wood from the same wood source, and it's actually grown in the same area. And we put ARFIDs, I don't know if everyone understands what that is, we put trackers. So we can identify if we got the right, you can be it's like wine. You can be in 100 stremata, and you have the north side is different than the south side because the slope, the minerality, whatever it is. The same with our wood. So we put ARFIDs, and they do a science and say, okay, we're finding more consistent barrels because we cut them too. We give them feedback when we reject. So yes, it is tracked from the wood. I feel like besides the process of getting the recipe right, the technical process, which we're not talking about today, I think the most influential part of the whole thing is the wood and the dynamic it has with the atmosphere. The humidity. So look at a barrel like this, sideways like that. If this is the inside of the barrel, it goes inside like that. Let's say it weaves through there. As it gets cold, it pulls it back out. It's pulling about flavor molecules, which that's one of the things that bourbon is so famous for, which we are not really talking about the history, is because it's a virgin oak. So it's full of micro flavors and so forth. So that's why the wood has such a profound effect. Now, you can have a tree, and it's not one tree that makes a barrel. That's another myth. So it's about fitting the staves to make a complete barrel. So you will have maybe from 50 different trees, different sizes as they're cut, and he's like a jigsaw, like a puzzle. He's putting it together around to make it. So that's why we have different flavors. And that's why we ask, and this one, have we put out the gold yet, guys? Are we there? Yeah, the second one. Please try it. Please drink. I mean, you're here to drink, guys, for goodness sakes, and ladies.
So definitely the answer to that question is a class all in of itself. And I could talk for days on it's like my passion. I love it. I'm so nerdy about it. Yeah. We'll do it sometime for sure. But tying it back to the history, I wanted to say that, the bourbon's namesake, Colonel Albert Bacon Blanton, he was the president of the distillery. And so what Elmer T. Lee remembered was that Colonel Blanton would entertain people. And so Colonel Blanton, one of the things that is under the belt of his legacy is that he was able to keep the distillery doors open during America's Prohibition. It was one of 6 distilleries in the whole U.S. that was able to stay open. And so obviously he was a very influential man, and part of his influence came from these parties that he would throw. And so what Colonel Blanton would do is he would find these honey holes and he would pick them, but he was also a master chef. And so he was doing bourbon dinners and pairing them with the barrels before anybody else was doing that. I think that the fact that Elmer remembered that some 30 years later is, first of all, incredible. It means that he learned that and he took it with him into his career. But also the fact that Colonel Blanton was just so ahead of his time in terms of, understanding how the whiskey works with the food and how to put all of that together. And the thing is, Colonel Blanton wouldn't sell it. He would share it with friends and family or dignitaries in the case of, doing the politics of it.
Yes, let's be clear, we're selling it. I'm not Colonel Blanton's. We're selling Blanton's, right? Okay, okay, it's that obvious. Please drink the gold, if you will, and tell me, anybody have a different flavor profile? Some of you have already done that. You didn't get one? Okay, let's find a bottle for that. Aaron, if you want to jump. Yeah, we'll get you one. Jump on that. Akis, do we have a bottle of gold black there? So anybody that has tasted it, we'll get you taken care of. Anybody have a different taste that you're tasting? Yes, ma'am.
On the nosing, I have chewing gum.
Mastica.
No, chewing.
I'm teasing. Classical chewing. No, yes, it can be. It is a flavor profile. Did anyone, you'll find a lot of times a little more ginger, a little more orange zest, a little more citrusy, a little bit.
Less vanilla.
It is less vanilla. The classic bourbon, which is brown sugar and vanilla, which kind of overpowers a lot of times the sweetness. This one's a little less sweet. Maybe a small pepper, a white pepper, just a little white pepper on the finish. But what you'll find is a little more elegant and more pronounced diversification of flavors. Is that what you found? Any other questions? Surely you have one for me. Not yet? You're working on it? Keep going, man. Keep going. Yes, sir.
I'm very curious about how you try to prepare Blanton's and generally bourbon foods.
Okay, that's a great question. As the world has progressed, and we've taken a lot from wine, that type of segment, we find that, for example, I'm going to talk about the gold for time, because I can't answer everything. We kind of pair this with a fattier steak, such as a ribeye steak instead of a filet, because we find that it pairs very good with the fatness that you'll have in your mouth, because it's a little sharper, and you don't want too much sweet, so it kind of contradicts that. So we'll pair this with a pancetta, a fattier meat, it's what we do there. Megalos, signomi. Folotimu. Mr. Vasilis Balatinos. So, I'm going to regress here a little bit. My wife is Greek. That's why I really have bad Greek. She's from Kavala, and really, usually she's yelling at me, so I don't get it so well. So anyway, with that, I moved here with my family so we could let our young children experience their papu and yayas and their uncles and aunts to understand their heritage, which we think is important, which is what we're talking about with bourbon. So when I first got here, I didn't have a job, and I sold my company there, and I was like, okay, I can live on the beach. Guys, I'm not made for the beach. Just that was a miss. Okay? So what I did is everyone said, "Oh, where are you from?" I said, Kentucky. New York. No, Kentucky. Florida. No, Kentucky. Chicago. Malaga. No, Kentucky. So what happened is I said, "Okay, Kentucky." They said, Kentucky Fried Chicken. I'm like, "No. What are you trying to say?" "No, we have bourbon and horses and beauty." And they said, "Bourbon, as we discussed, it wasn't that good when we first brought it." I was very familiar with Blanton's, and I started bringing that back when I'd go back and forth, and the people loved it. And there's when I got the idea in Genesis that the Greek people have a nice palate. They would enjoy this. They just need to be introduced. So who in the world and where would I start to introduce Blanton's bourbon? There was this guy, silver-haired, beautiful man, came in and he said, "I'm Vasilis Balatinos. We want to advertise with you with Blanton's." I said, "Okay, fair enough." And he introduced me to this gentleman 20 years ago. At King George, when you walk in the door, there was some chairs and a settee right to the right. I was upstairs with the sommelier, and my wife was down with you two. That's the first time. This gentleman gets to see where we're at today because of you. And Greece, what you're going to enjoy from here forward is really, truly from him. Because he had the passion, the vision, he understood the product, he put people together that had the same passion. It's a true story. And without Vasilis and without Harris and without everyone that they combined, our dear friend Kostas behind, all of these people that people had appreciation for delicate, finer things. And that's really what we're here to do, guys, so enjoy. So thank you, Vasilis, for coming. So, anybody else have a question about gold, where we were at? So you see the difference in the flavor profile. Do we have a barrel proof? Because I'm going to push for time. Can we get the barrel proof for our fans here? So drink that up, enjoy it, get a little lubricated. It helps. It's a boring thing. And then I want Aaron to tell you a little bit about the influence past the beginning, kind of past where the Japanese brought it, what the next segment for Blanton's was when we started going more global.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we said already that 95, the gold was introduced, and really it was a way to try to sell a bourbon that wasn't selling, and of course it was released internationally for the reasons that we discussed. And it was the mid-2000s, so we're kind of talking in chunks of a decade here, 84 to 94, let's say, 94 to 2004 was when the next whiskey that you're going to be trying was introduced. And by this time, we had planted some seeds in the French market, and at the time, I should back up. Again, Blanton's a product of many firsts. I don't think were many, if maybe this was the first one. I shouldn't say that. There weren't many cask strength bourbons out there. There was such thing as cask strength scotches. There was cask strength Irish. There was cask strength Canadian. I'm not sure if there were very many cask strength bourbons out there. So
historically, we weren't the first, but modern era, we definitely were the first to go cask strength.
Yeah, one of the first to kind of adopt this into our process. So what you're drinking now is single barrel still, but also cask strength. So the ABV is going to vary. And 2003, 2004, this was first launched in the French market, and now it is a staple of our lineup for sure. And I think that it really rounds out the trio. So we've got the original, and then the gold, which is a little bit more refined, and then the cask strength that's just something so special in every single barrel because you're drinking it at a different ABV each time. not to get too far down the technical side, or Tony will kind of get me with a cane here, but typically we see it between like 63 to 70% ABV is kind of the range that we come in. And then what we started doing is taking this idea of cask strength bourbon and taking those Michael Jordan barrels, those honey barrels, right? And we decided to make those a limited series, limited edition. And so each year, Tony and I and the team, we sit down, and throughout the year, we're tasting these barrels, and we're just waiting for the barrels to speak to us. And every once in a while, one of those barrels, the light bulb goes off, and it's like, aha, man, something good here. So this year, we have something really special. Today's the first day that anybody has really ever had eyes on it globally. So you guys are the first. Athens is the debut market this year for that. A very special thing, and we're very, very honored to say that. I will say, you know, everything that we did with these barrels is cask strength, 7 in total, so it tends to be very collectible, and when they're gone, they're gone. This year's special release is an homage to the char level in our barrels. Tony talked a lot about how important the barrel was to the whiskey's flavor. Some say as much as 80% of the whiskey's total flavor comes from the barrel itself. Of course, that's a hard thing to quantify exactly. But the other part of our process is that we use what's called Char No.4, which is the deepest level of char that we can get. And so they've got these things that look like jet engines, basically, that are just massive flamethrowers. And they haven't put the barrel heads on the barrels yet, and they roll them through in the cooperage, and they turn the flames on, and they torch the insides for 55 seconds. That's the longest char in terms of a standard offering that you can get. And the idea behind that is that we're after bold, rich, saturated flavors. And if we char it more, we're caramelizing more of those natural sugars in the oak. So this is the Char No.4 edition. Doesn't necessarily mean that those barrels, you know, taste like barrel char, just like the honey barrel series doesn't necessarily mean it tastes like honey. The other kind of colloquialism we use in Kentucky about the Char No.4, we call it an alligator char. Does anybody know why we call it an alligator char? Exactly right. Yeah, so when the wood cracks after that intense heat for almost a minute, it looks like alligator skin when it comes out. And so it's just kind of, not technically, I guess, but known as the alligator char.
So as you're enjoying these 3 different levels of Blantons, please take your time. Let the finish on the last one kind of sit with you a minute. As you'll find, it's a higher proof, but if you feel like it's aggressive at first, but then it dissipates into something really elegant and a very long finish. So while you're doing that, and we'll talk about what you're tasting in a second, where Aaron segued, this is the global release. We only do this once a year. We may do it twice a year going forward, we don't know. But we thought this would be the perfect place in Athens, Greece, at this bar show to release it. And that's something exciting. And it's the first time we've ever had a global release, simultaneously kept it cloaked, didn't tell anybody, had the social media, and we had a great marketing team that was Greek support that. Instead of having a US one do it, it was Belma. It was a great, great company that did a fantastic job from all the photography. As you'll see back here, the teaser, which we did block out and mask a little bit to give a little bit of a teaser, you know, you women understand what I'm talking about. And then with that, what we tried to do in developing the box, beside the char and the uniqueness that we talked about the whiskey, these 7 barrels that we chose, I don't know, Aaron, we probably tasted just a little under 100, and we found those 7. So there's only 7 barrels of this, and I can tell you 1 barrel is not for sale. It's just straight up. I got that one, and I get one every year out of it, so there's 6. But Greece will be the first place and the only place for quite some time. We don't know. We haven't defined that. Harris is still bribing me. Paqueto, you know. No, I'm teasing. Is how long we're going to have it exclusively in Greece. And he has his Teddy's Speakeasy opening in Agroupolis. How do I say? Agroupolis. And it's a speakeasy, which basically you can have a taste of different exotic whiskeys and bourbons, as well as purchase. So kind of like a cava and a bar speakeasy, the same. So with that, we did an ode to it, and it presents itself, because it's a collector's edition, typically. And as it closes, you can open it. Pull that side, Aaron, because you can open it, and as you see, it looks like it's on the Rafi. If you look backwards, I'll move this so you can see. There, it kind of sits where the bottle is designed and where it came from. And we have a little bit of this. And this design was by Aaron and myself. And of course, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of good. And this just flew in 1 o'clock. 3 hours ago, it landed here at the show, so you know. So, and we air freighted 2 cases, which is 12 bottles, is all is in Greece now. The rest of it won't arrive till the end of December because it's on a ship. But we air freighted these bottles and these 12 boxes. And what we want to say is if you sign up today or tomorrow at the Speakeasy, the booth, we're 304, we're going to give away this particular bottle to someone for free. Retail on it's going to be $1,500 to $2,000. I'm not sure what it's going to end up being. So it'll be a great gift for attending. You do not have to be in person to win, but what you will have to do is go pick it up Thursday or beyond at Teddy's Speakeasy. So it won't be given at the show. So that's our contribution to Grains to Drops and Teddy's Speakeasy, and a nice way to get you to come see it, right? So anyway, any questions about this while we're talking, or any questions about the barrel proof? I like it. You're 3 drinks in and no more talking.
Considering the available technology, and all the variables each year that are needed to produce more honey barrels. So
That's a great question. I'm going to let Aaron answer that one, but it's a nice question.
So I'll give you a lawyer's favorite answer. It depends. Yeah, you know, I think that's exactly to the heart of what makes single barrel so special. Really and truly, what affects our whiskey is Mother Nature and time. And so the process that Elmer T. Lee created, you know, taking inspiration from his predecessor, Colonel Albert Bacon Blanton, is a priority on taste. So, you know, considerations like age, like what part of the warehouse necessarily it comes from. I mean, those are definitely all factors. But at the end of the day, what I think, especially with these special editions, but with every Blanton's that we do, is we make the decision to bottle based on taste alone. And I really feel like that is the reason that this brand has been so successful over time, is that emphasis on quality over quantity. It's not an easy way to make whiskey. In fact, it's kind of a pain in the neck. It's slow, it's hands-on, but it's what we have to do to get it right.
As you can see behind us.
Yeah, there's some clips of them bottling it by hand in the bottling hall. And so, you know, in terms of like looking for constants, you know, there's a lot of consistency on the front end, but then the magic really happens when you take a look at that Mother Nature and time thing, and the barrel gets all the deference.
I'd like to add to that. It's a really good question. Both you had a good one and you had a really good one. Do you have children? Are you married? I can't speak to you. Who here has children? Yeah. Also? 1. Okay. Who has 2 or more? Okay. Do they look the same? Are they from the same mother? The same father? As far as you know, Lexi. So with that being said, they look different. And when you have your first one, you say, okay, this is what the combination, the variables of the same mother and father look like. This is what our children will be. That isn't the case always. It's the same thing. We start with the same ingredients. We do the same process, what we can control, and Aaron's right. From there, we have different children. But what we have to do, some of them are a little better, some of them are a little worse, some of them we ship off to grandma. And that's how we work it. So if that's a real life example of if you have brothers and sisters, you may act different. You have different gene pool, and that's really the truth. Because the different grain, just as in wine, as you know, can come from a different region, a different hill, more sun on one, more rain in the other. Any other questions we have? Come on, guys. Yes, sir. That is correct. We do have a thief in this. That is a big copper tube that basically used by suction and gravity. You put your finger over the hole and you put it down and it'll pull up, and we thief that into a bottle. As you can see, it's hand bottled line there. Those are going into the bottling hall. So one thing for time, on the barrel proof I wanted to share with you because I want to get this out. The reason you have those complexities in the finish is because we non-chill filter it. So you have more oils. So you have these micro oils that are still in the bourbon that normally are filtered out with most whiskeys, including original, right? So with that being done, if you kind of chew it, just, move it. What you're doing is you're bursting those micro oils, and that's what will give you the best finish. So that's why this is really called a sipping whiskey. It's for that. That's the reason we do that. So we're about 10 minutes left, so more questions?
Can you say the story behind Snoopers?
Yeah, I would love to tell you. So Aaron and I developed that back in, There was a company that owned before when the Japanese bought it. They had it, and they were a good marketing company. They came up with the bottle. They came up with the stopper last minute. So I'll tell you a cool story about the stopper. That wasn't the original top for Blanton's. It was a last minute addition. And so what it was, I don't know if you've ever heard of Rock Hill Farms. It's a glass stopper, kind of like in a decanter top almost. With that being said, that's what was designed. But one of them, who was a very clever marketer, obviously we're still so pleased he did, he said, what if we put a horse? Because like the question I had posed to me, what about Kentucky? I said, horses and bourbon. We're the horse capital of the world. We sell, matter of fact, right now today, for this week, we'll sell 4,000 horses to every billionaire around the world right now in Kentucky. It's one of the times we're selling. So with that, it was an ode to Kentucky to say it was a bourbon, because the glass is more of a perfume, maybe even a French style. So it kind of gave it a connection to the local market. That was the story of that. I think you have questions.
How do you probably preserve bourbon in general? It's like wine, wine freeze just.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you, once you buy a bottle of bourbon, how do you make sure that it stays good when it's at home? I think that's what I'm understanding. So the first thing to remember is, once that whiskey gets dumped out of that barrel, it's pretty much locked in terms of flavor. It'll change a little bit over a long period of time, and that's just from the oxidation that naturally occurs. But the best thing that you can do to store a whiskey is keep it in a room temperature, dark place where the humidity is not too high, not too low. You don't need to lay it on its side like you do with a wine. And part of the reason that the whiskey will basically keep indefinitely, I mean, you see some of these shops, I know there's a few in Kentucky, they're all over, but, every once in a while somebody is selling like a pre-prohibition bourbon whiskey or a pre-prohibition rye, like a whiskey that was made in the 1920s, which is crazy to think about. 100-year-old whiskey still in the bottle, and I've been fortunate enough to try some of them, and they are so well preserved. The other reason that whiskey keeps for so long is because the ABV is much higher than wine. And so the ABV kind of acts as a force field around all of the components that make up the whiskey. A wine is much lower, 15% at the high end. And so it's going to break down over time, and it's going to evolve over time as well. But with a whiskey, that high ABV kind of fortifies it and allows you to keep it. So yeah, as long as you're keeping it in a cool, dry, dark space, you're going to be able to drink it 100 years from now.
I recommend drinking it quickly. Listen, the last thing, we've got about 5 minutes or less, I believe. Is that right, Joanna? 7. Acrovos. So, the philosophy of bourbon in Kentucky, what we really want you to do is have fellowship. And I think there's no one better in the world that does it than Greeks. Think back to Papu, Yaya, your mother and father. Remember the days when Friday and Saturday we were at the taverna? But it was your neighbors there and their families and their kids were playing and running. This, to me, is what bourbon is. It's the same thing in Kentucky. We collect things like this that are limited. It's only going to be made, these 7 barrels, and only 6 on the market. That's it. It'll never be reproduced. And it's unique. So the value of that will keep going up. The value, real value in bourbon is sharing. The real value is sharing it with someone you care about or someone that you want to enjoy or something, experience something different. And that's really in a Zoe, guys. You know it. You taught the world this, not us teaching you. We kind of adopted that in bourbon country. When you come to us, I would serve you that in my home. Before I was involved with it professionally, that's what you would have when you came in my home. And we didn't keep them. We didn't preserve them. We didn't collect them. We drank them. So, but now, holding them for the right occasion, I do recommend that for when you want to share it with someone special, or if it's placed. The last thing I'll say, because we got just a few minutes if I can, in the Greek market, we're very proud to be here. I think the approach is going to be a little bit different than before, if I may speak about that. I think we want to also, I think it's presentation. We want to be represented with someone who has the passion, the philotimu, not knowledge. You don't have to be the most knowledgeable. That's not what we're asking. What we're asking is if you'll share it with the people that will enjoy it and drink it, that's what we really want. We have representation from all walks of life here. We have tasting clubs. We have businessmen. We have legends. And another legends behind you. And from that, yeah, it means old. I know. Right? You believe me? So with that being said, is we do have a real spirit in bourbon. That's why we don't wear ties. It's not that we don't. In many settings we have to. But really, normally we would wear jeans, a jacket, open shirt, and we would want you to come to our house, just like Greeks are the best at hospitality. Kentuckians are too. So I really think there's a connection between bourbon and Greece. And we're very, very honored for you all to let us be a part of this show, inviting us to it. Thank you, Harris. We really tried to make something a little special in the booth, where it's an experience in totality. That's why it's a speakeasy. That booth is only to enclose the outside noise so you have a certain experience. We have coffee there. We have a master of coffee. We have a master bartender. What do you want to enjoy? Please just ask. That's what bourbon's at. Chipero, that's us later with some Gavros and Sardelis and Mata, my friend, Mata. But so this is going to be given away. I think the drawing is going to be the last hour tomorrow, and we will notify you. So please sign up. You don't have to be in person. And is there any other question before we leave? I think we're on our last couple minutes.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Keep drinking the good stuff.